Alright, I wasn't planning to make a video today, but the UK budget was just announced, and among all the policies that they did talk about there was one that's really going to affect British citizens living abroad, and that is that the voluntary contributions from abroad to the UK state pension are finally being changed. And it's probably not the change that you wanted to see. Let's talk about it. Now, this video is only going to be of interest to British citizens or people who've lived in the UK or people who've worked in the UK. So unfortunately, if you haven't done any of those things and if you're not interested to find out what we've lost, then you probably don't want to watch the rest of this video. Please watch a different video on the channel. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And before we get started, I'd like to say a really big thank you to all of our paid supporters here on YouTube. You're really helping us keep the channel going. It's really encouraging to have people support us for that very low monthly subscription. Really appreciate you. If you're a fan of the channel, please consider joining us with the button below. So in a development that is probably surprising no one who knows about the system, the UK government has finally noticed that the voluntary contributions from abroad are extremely beneficial to people who don't live in the UK, and they've decided to change the system. So the way it currently works, if you've lived in the UK for 3 years or you've paid into the national insurance system, the British state pension for 3 years, you can then make voluntary payments if you're not living in the UK, and those voluntary payments are at a very low level. If you were working just before you left, you might be eligible to pay Class 2 voluntary payments, and those cost £3.50 per week. If you weren't working immediately before you left, and if you otherwise don't meet the requirements for Class 2, you can pay Class 3, and those are currently £17.75 per week. Both of them get you the same benefit, which is a UK state pension. So if you're eligible, it was much better to be paying Class 2. You were paying about a fifth of what Class 3 payers were paying, and you were getting the same benefit for it. Up until earlier in the year, there was a bit of an amnesty so that people could back pay even more. So it was possible to back pay, I believe, up to about 16 years, but that amnesty's finished. Right now, you can back pay up to 6 years. In order to get a UK state pension at all, you need to pay in for 10 full years. That's the basic requirement. That would get you 10/35ths of a full pension. And a full pension is currently worth just over £12,000 a year. Now, the reason this is so amazing is that if you were paying in at the Class 2 rate, to get 35 full years of contributions, you'd only need to pay £6,000, which is incredible because then that would get you £12,000 a year for life, starting at age 67. Unreal. Even the more expensive Class 3 contributions, 35 years worth of contributions would only cost you about £32,000, and that would entitle you to the same £12,000 a year pension. For Class 2, your payoff period once you start receiving the pension is only 6 months. So you get your money back after 6 months, and anything after that is kind of profit. For Class 3, your payoff period is just under 3 years. Unreal, amazing system, really beneficial. Anyone who's been paying into that consistently is going to get a huge benefit out of it, but it was too good to be true, and as of April 2026 it will no longer be true. So the government has announced 2 major changes to the system. The first is that Class 2 contributions from abroad will not be available after April. It was too good a deal. It didn't make sense, to be honest. I'm not surprised they're scrapping it. I'm just surprised that they let it continue so long. So after April 2026, you will no longer be able to pay Class 2 contributions. Class 3 contributions will still be around for people who live abroad, but the other change is that the government is making the conditions to qualify for these much stricter. As I mentioned earlier, the current system is if you've lived in the UK for 3 years, or if you've paid into the state pension for 3 years, you can then pay voluntary contributions at the Class 3 level, or possibly at the Class 2 if you qualify. From April 2026, that requirement will go up to 10 years. So you'll have to have lived in the UK continuously for 10 years. So that's an unbroken 10-year stretch, or paid into the UK state pension for 10 years. And that doesn't seem to need to be continuous. So you could maybe have paid in for 3 years, then moved somewhere else, then come back and paid in for another 7 years. That would qualify you. But those are the conditions to qualify to be able to pay in on a voluntary basis. Much harder, but again, I think this makes sense. Apparently the government is doing some kind of review of the whole system, and they're looking at ways to make sure that people who have a limited connection to the UK do not qualify to pay into the state pension and therefore qualify to receive a state pension. And again, I think that kind of makes sense. The whole system so far has been a bit of a loophole. It seems like it was an unintended loophole. And, you know, if you've been able to take advantage of that, great, but going forward it's going to be a lot harder. Now, I do have some questions, and at the moment they're unanswered because the documents that we've been given, the announcements and so on, are not completely clear. The first question is, as of next year, is everyone who's currently paying in going to be reassessed to see whether they're eligible under the new guidelines? So people who are currently paying in Class 2, Class 3 contributions, are they going to be checked again? And if they don't meet the new stricter guidelines, are they not going to be able to pay in anymore? That's my first question. I'm not sure about this. It seems ambiguous. On the one hand, it does say people who are paying Class 3 contributions currently will not have to do anything. They will continue paying them next year. For Class 2, it doesn't say that. It says people who are paying Class 2 will be contacted by letter in July. Now, I don't know what that letter's going to say. I'm assuming, and you know what happens when you assume, but I'm assuming that Class 2 payers are basically going to be rolled into Class 3. They'll get a letter saying, hey, if you want to continue paying, then you'd be paying at the Class 3 rates that are this much this year. Do you want to do this? Yes, no. The other option possibly is that people who are currently paying Class 2 will be asked to reapply to pay Class 3. Now, I don't think this is very likely because HMRC probably doesn't have the manpower to deal with this, but it is possible. Now, it is reassuring to see that the websites and the announcements and so on say that any contributions made before April 2026 will not be affected by these changes. So if you've paid in already, if you've got more than 10 years paid into the system, you will be able to get a UK state pension eventually in retirement from age 67 or whatever the age is when you get to claim. So those contributions won't be cancelled or refunded or made invalid in any way. The question marks are all about who's going to be able to pay in the future. Now, for me, I've been paying in at the Class 3 rate because I came to Japan straight from university, so I've never worked in the UK, so I didn't qualify for Class 2 contributions. I've been happily paying the Class 3 contributions because even at that higher rate, I think they're a good deal and they're a good way to diversify. So not just stock market investments, not just Japanese Nenkin, but also a UK state pension means that I'll have different income streams in retirement. However, I do not meet these new stricter conditions for paying into the system. So I haven't paid in 10 years into the UK state pension, and I also haven't lived in the UK for 10 years either. I've only lived there for about 8. So there is a chance that next year I will be kicked out of the system and I'll only have the 22 years that I've paid in from abroad and won't be able to add those final 13 years that I'd need to get a full pension. It's not the end of the world because I would get a partial pension, and to be honest, I don't think I'd have a lot to complain about if that were the case. I'm not sure how it's going to go. It's pretty unclear at the moment, but we'll get more information as we go forward and we will report it here on the channel. Now, if you are a UK citizen or you've worked in the UK, you've lived in the UK, and you're not currently paying into the system, it might be a good idea to try and apply immediately. Try and apply as soon as possible. Try and get in before those new conditions come into play, especially if, like me, you're not going to meet the stricter conditions to be allowed to pay into the system. There is a chance that if you get in before that April deadline, you may be grandfathered in and be able to pay in even though you wouldn't get in after April. So there's a real time limit now. You want to get your application in as soon as possible. It's taking them a really long time to process things, but there is a chance that if you applied before the deadline, you would be judged based on the current conditions and not the new ones that are coming in April. But I don't know, I have to admit, the information's not 100% clear, and who knows what lurks in the minds of HMRC anyway. But how about you? Are you paying into the UK state pension on a voluntary basis at the moment? Were you planning to? Is this something that you've been putting off? Well, if you have, I would recommend not putting it off any longer. Let us know in the comments. Let me know if you've got any questions. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.